Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the Hard Answers. I'm Tom Graham. The U.S. loves immigrants, and immigrants love the United States. 1 out of 5 immigrants in the world live in the United States, and we welcome them with open arms. Anyone who says we don't is trying to sell you something. 1 out of 7 people in the United States is an immigrant. The United States has the highest number of immigrants in the world and one of the highest overall percentages of immigrants to all developed countries. Contrary to popular belief, 75% of all immigrants are here lawfully, and they play an extremely important role in our society and our economy. And even though, on average, immigrants do indeed take more than they contribute, their children contribute more than enough to make up for that initial taking. Immigrants are also very necessary to keep birth rates at sustainable levels in the United States. Due to massive Border Patrol spending after September 11, 2001, fewer people try to unlawfully immigrate to the United States over the southern border than ever before, and that problem is 50% smaller than it was in 2003. The mass majority of unlawful immigrants have only committed a misdemeanor called unlawful entry or unlawful presence, but are afraid to register for amnesty under DACA or any other program because if they are deported, they will not be allowed to enter the country again for 3 to 10 years. Adults brought to the country unlawfully as children need special treatment since they did not enter voluntarily. For all intents and purposes, they were forced to come by their parents and now have no homeland to go back to. Even though building a wall will be exceptionally effective in certain areas, a one-size-fits-all method of border security will prove to be ineffective in other areas of the border. Instead, certain areas will need vehicle barriers. Certain other areas will need a virtual wall, monitoring by high-tech drones, sensors, and watchtowers. And in other areas, mountains and large rivers will serve as natural barriers. Sanctuary cities, on the other hand, are just a bad idea all around because they incentivize unlawful behavior. Anything that incentivizes unlawful behavior is bad for society and dangerous for those trying to enforce the law. However, due to the 10th Amendment and parallel sovereignty, no city or state can be forced by the federal government to enforce federal law. And considering nullification was successfully used by the northern states, not returning runaway slaves to southern states, sanctuary cities, although ill-conceived, are lawful. And speaking of enforcing federal laws, border states ought to be able to help the federal government by enforcing federal immigration law. States enforce other federal law, why not immigration law? The number of illegal southern border crossings is going down every day. A far larger percent of unlawful immigration is now happening by school and work visa overstayers. We need to continue to be vigilant in monitoring these programs for abuse. And finally, considering our national debt and the looming interest rate increases that threaten to devour more than $1.2 trillion of our budget each year, we need to keep spending under control. Will spending on immigration and drug control programs save us money in the long run? Thank you for watching. For more information, please check out the sources in the description below or simply continue watching. I'm Tom Graham for Return to Integrity. Okay, you're still here. Let's continue. The United States was home to 10.7 million unlawful immigrants in 2016, a 13% decline from a peak of 12.2 million in 2007, according to the most recent Pew Research Center estimates. This decade-long decline was driven almost entirely by a decrease in unlawful immigrants from Mexico, even as the numbers of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras illegal immigrants increased. Meanwhile, a growing share of unauthorized immigrants were not people who had entered the country illegally, but had arrived legally and then overstayed their visas. More recent data from the federal government show that 2018 saw an uptick in border apprehensions, which are often used as a proxy measure for unlawful entries. There were nearly 467,000 apprehensions at the southwest border last year, the most in any calendar year since at least 2012. Still, the number of apprehensions in 2018 remained far below the more than 1 million apprehensions per fiscal year routinely recorded in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000. 76% of all immigrants in the United States are lawful immigrants. In absolute numbers, the United States has a larger immigrant population than any other country, with 47 million immigrants as of 2015. This represents 19.1% of the 244 million international immigrants worldwide and 14.4% of the U.S. population. Some other countries have larger proportions of immigrants, such as Switzerland at 28.9% and Canada at 21.9%, but the mass majority of OECD countries have a far smaller proportion of their population as immigrants. Germany has 11.9%, France has 11.6%, and Italy has 9.4%. Why is immigration even necessary? For one, the best and the brightest aren't necessarily born in the United States, and the U.S. gets the best and the brightest through immigration. But immigration is not only good for the United States, it's necessary. Birth rates are going down to unsustainable levels in almost all OECD countries. We need immigrants to increase the population and to do the jobs and to start the businesses and to pay the taxes to support the infrastructure, institutions, and our way of life. Without immigrants, we will either need a world war or a massive plague just to incentivize our own citizens to get the birth rates up. It's perfectly reasonable to debate the effect large number of immigrants will have on our way of life, on our laws, and on our institutions, but there is no debate about whether or not we need immigrants. We do. If immigration is necessary and good, why not just have open borders? Well, why do you have walls and doors on your house? Why don't you leave your front door unlocked when you go on vacation? Why do you lock up valuable things? The United States, our values, our way of life is precious and should be protected. If you leave your front door open, even if it's not your fault that you got robbed, you should have known better than to make it easy for the crime to happen. You should have taken reasonable precautions. Strong border security is a reasonable precaution. Protection of our borders, our nation, our state, our property, our way of life is the most important proper role of government there is. The EU's handling of the Syrian refugee crisis shows how mass immigration increases crime. It has long been known that the higher the economic disparity in an area, the higher the crime. And considering immigrants typically only have the possessions they can carry, impoverished migrant camps close to wealthy suburbs create the perfect imbalance to incubate criminal behavior. Open borders would create mass migration, and that in turn would substantially increase violent crime. Also, border security deals with issues like human trafficking and drug smuggling. 90% of all heroin entering the United States comes over the southern border. Why do people immigrate? People immigrate temporarily and permanently for many reasons. For temporary work, there are estimated to be between 1 and 2.7 million hired farm workers in the United States, including migrant, seasonal, year-round, and guest program workers. The H-2A temporary farm work visa is valid for 1 to 3 years, but only about 100,000 H-2As are issued per year. The H-1B temporary high-skilled worker visa is valid for 3 to 6 years. There are somewhere between 390,000 and 510,000 current H-1B holders in the United States. This particular program has been highly abused, and in the last few years the government has started cracking down on that abuse. People immigrate for a chance for a better life. Student visas and the visa lottery are available for that. People immigrate to be with family. A large portion of immigrants are sponsored by spouses or family members and get to bypass the visa lottery or qualifying for other programs. People immigrate to escape war, violence, persecution, or natural disasters. These are called refugees. Asylum seekers are simply refugees that have not had their refugee status verified. Refugees in the United States automatically have the opportunity to become lawful permanent residents and eventually citizens. This means they don't have to qualify for some other visa program or win a visa lottery. And it is also why they make the trek in caravans for thousands of miles across Mexico to arrive at the U.S. southern border. Some might consider this an abuse of our humanitarian programs. Others might just consider it the refugees looking out for their own best interest. However, it reasonably makes one skeptical of whether or not they have any intention of showing up to immigration court once they're admitted to the United States. Does immigration help world poverty? Although we should continue our humanitarian immigration policies and programs for refugees, there are humanitarian issues that immigration simply cannot solve. World poverty cannot be solved through immigration. The U.S. allows about 1 million people each year to immigrate. The people in impoverished countries are increasing their populations by about 80 million people per year. There is no conceivable immigration plan that can help world poverty. Poverty must be dealt with in the countries in which it occurs. The good news is that in the last 20 years, extreme poverty in the world has gone from 33% of the world's population to about 10%. That's a fantastic trend. What is an illegal immigrant versus an undocumented immigrant? There are two types of immigration, lawful and unlawful. Some call unlawful immigration undocumented immigration, and others call it illegal immigration. These people used to be referred to as illegal aliens in government documents. In reality, it's somewhere between the two. The law states that unlawful entry into the U.S. is a misdemeanor, and unlawful presence, coming to visit with a passport and then overstaying longer than you should have, or overstaying your work or student visa, is also a misdemeanor. Only if you have been deported is your entry back into the country a felony. So the mass majority of unlawful immigrants in the United States have committed a simple misdemeanor. However, if they overstayed by less than 90 days and they leave the U.S. voluntarily or through deportation, they are not allowed back in for 3 years. If they overstayed by more than 90 days, then they are not allowed back in for 10 years. This is the biggest reason most unlawful immigrants don't want to be identified in programs like DACA. It's not a matter of simply getting in line behind those who have legally applied for citizenship. They might be deported and have to wait 3 to 10 years before applying to get back in legally. And on top of that, they'll have to qualify for one of the existing immigration programs. Deportation process. Deportation of unlawful immigrants sometimes involves an immigration judge, a hearing, and an order of removal or a stay of removal. The problem with this is that our immigration courts have more than a 2-year backlog, so of the immigrants who enter unlawfully and are caught, held, given a court appearance date, and then released into the U.S., only 25% of them ever show up for their day in court. However, the Obama administration deported unlawful immigrants 83% of the time using processes that do not involve the judicial process. These are known as administrative, expedited, and reinstatement of removal processes. Customs and Border Protection and ICE are granted this authority by the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act of 1996, signed into law by President Clinton, and the Immigration and Nationality Act. Since the year 2000, the number of border apprehensions and deportations has gone down 76%, but unlawful crossings has also gone down significantly since 2003. The Trump administration is now using the same administrative deportation processes that the Obama administration used. Statistics. 75% of Republicans think immigration is a very big problem versus only 19% of Democrats. 71% of all unlawful immigrants are coming through Mexico. 42% of all unlawful immigrants came through ports of entry legally. Stopping all unlawful southern border crossings could potentially stop 41% of all unlawful immigration in the future. Although nothing would stop all unlawful entry, barriers, real and virtual, can significantly reduce the cost of border enforcement over time. Border enforcement. Since 1990, the annual cost of border enforcement by the U.S. Border Patrol has gone up from $236 million to $3.8 billion. After the attack on September 11, 2001, the annual budget of Customs and Border Patrol has gone from $5.9 billion to $13.2 billion. On top of that, ICE spending has gone up from $3.3 billion per year to $6.1 billion per year. The increase in border enforcement spending is seen as a major contributing factor as to why the number of unlawful immigrants has declined so much since 2003. Currently, 1/3 of our border has some kind of fence, but most of it is vehicle barriers, not pedestrian barriers. This only reduces the ease of smuggling drugs. The populations of border states are divided on whether or not we should install border fences. In fact, the closer you get to the border, the fewer people, even fewer Republicans, agree that a border wall is appropriate. Many people who currently have picturesque views of Mexico or the Rio Grande River would suddenly be looking at a large metal slatted fence, and they are going to fight any attempt to take their property. Kind of like when the people in Boston fought the offshore wind farms. Why not build a high-tech electronic barrier instead? Well, because we tried, and we failed. The Secure Border Initiative Network, a high-tech surveillance system to reduce border smuggling, from 2005 to 2011 had cost taxpayers almost $1 billion for 2 regions in Arizona covering just 53 miles of the 2,000-mile border. However, we did learn from that experiment that perhaps a one-size-fits-all approach to border security might be the wrong move. It might be reasonable to build an impenetrable fence or wall in certain places and use vehicle barrier trenches, radar towers, drones, thermal imaging, and sensors in others. Perhaps a real fence in the Arizona desert and a virtual fence along the Rio Grande. Are unlawful immigrants a benefit or hindrance on our economy? In 1995, the General Accounting Office of the United States of America created a report to answer this. They looked at 3 nationwide studies to find the answer. All 3 studies concluded that unlawful immigrants in the United States generated more in costs than revenues to federal, state, and local governments combined. However, their estimates of the national net cost varied considerably, ranging from an inflation-adjusted $3.3 billion per year to $31 billion per year. Because little data are available on unlawful immigrants' use of public services and tax payments, the various indirect approaches used to estimate costs and revenues were often based on assumptions whose reasonableness is unknown. Moreover, the study varied considerably in the range of costs and revenues they included and their treatment of certain items, making them difficult to compare. As a result, a great deal of uncertainty remains about the actual national fiscal impact of unlawful immigrants. Then we have reports like the right-leaning Heritage Report that estimates the net impact to taxpayers is closer to costing $54 billion a year, and the anti-immigrant FAIR Report claiming the cost to be closer to $113 billion per year. In 2017, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine created their own study about immigration in general. Not unlawful immigration, all immigration. Their study came to the conclusion that all immigrants cost taxpayers, on average, $1,600 per year. Using that number, 10.7 million unlawful immigrants cost at least $17.1 billion per year. But the children of first-generation immigrants outperform native-born children economically, and thus the net impact is positive over time. The study also takes guesses about the children of unlawful immigrants, but rightfully says it has no data to substantiate those guesses. Thank you for watching. I'm Tom Graham for Return to Integrity.